August 13th, 2018. A Monday morning in Frederick, Colorado. The sun rises over the Rockies, casting a warm, suburban glow on Saratoga Trail. On the surface, it is a picture of the American dream. A beautiful home, a manicured lawn, and a family that, according to social media, had it all. But inside house number 2825, the silence is deafening. Shannan Watts, 15 weeks pregnant, has vanished. Her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, are gone. No struggle, no forced entry. Just an unmade bed and a wedding ring left on a nightstand like a final period at the end of a sentence. For the next 48 hours, the world would watch a man named Chris Watts play the role of a frantic husband. We watched him pace on his porch. We watched him plead with news cameras. But while the public saw a man in crisis, watched investigators were beginning to see a man in a mask. And as that mask began to crack, a darkness was revealed that would haunt the collective conscience of a nation forever. This isn't just a missing persons case. This is the forensic autopsy of a family annihilation. Welcome to Cold Trail Crimes. I'm your narrator, and today we are peeling back the layers of one of the most chilling deceptions in criminal history. We are going beyond the headlines to examine every frame of body cam footage, every stutter in a confession, and every shadow left behind at the Saratoga Trail home. Before we step into the timeline of this tragedy, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. By joining us, you help ensure that these stories are told with the depth, respect, and the clinical focus they deserve. This is part one of our three-part investigative series, The Timeline of Deception. Let's head back to that Monday morning when the first crack in the dream appeared. The clock begins at 1:48 a.m. A doorbell camera captures Shannan Watts being dropped off at her home after a business trip to Arizona. She enters the front door, and for the world outside, the house goes dark. 12 hours later, the silence is broken. Nicole Atkinson, Shannan's close friend, is standing on that same porch. Shannan hasn't answered her texts. She missed a doctor's appointment to hear her baby's heartbeat. This wasn't just unlike Shannan, it was impossible. When Nicole looks through the glass, she sees Shannan's shoes by the door. She sees the car in the garage. But when she knocks, the only thing that answers is the heavy, stagnant air of a house that feels suddenly, inexplicably empty. By 1:40 p.m., Officer Scott Coonrod arrives for a welfare check. This is where the mask of Chris Watts is first fitted for the public. He arrives at the house in his work truck, pulling into the driveway with a deliberate, almost agonizing slowness. Watch the footage closely. He doesn't bolt from the vehicle. He doesn't rush to the officer with questions. He stays in that truck for over 60 seconds, in a situation where every second could mean life or death for a pregnant wife and two toddlers. Chris Watts is taking his time. When he finally opens the door, the atmosphere changes. He is polite, he is helpful, but he is also strangely detached. As Officer Coonrod moves through the home, the camera reveals a haunting domestic tableau. And Shannan's phone is tucked between the cushions of the sofa. Her purse is on the kitchen counter, stuffed with her ID and credit cards. Her medication is still there. In the master bedroom, the bed is stripped of its top sheet, and Shannan's wedding ring sits on the nightstand. Chris tells the officer that Shannan said she was going to a friend's house with the kids, but he can't say which friend. He claims they had a civil but emotional conversation about separating earlier that morning. Yet as he speaks, his body betrays him. He is rocking on his heels. He is laughing nervously. He is talking too much about mundane details, while the central fact, that his entire family has vanished into thin air, seems to sit on the periphery of his concern. The tension shifts from the house to the sidewalk as Chris encounters his neighbor, Nate Trinastig. Nate has a surveillance system that covers the street. This is the moment the investigation truly begins. We see Chris, Nate, and Officer Coonrod huddled around a television in Nate's living room. The footage shows Chris backing his truck up to the garage at 5:27 a.m. that morning. It shows him loading something into the cab and the bed of the truck. What it doesn't show is Shannan or the girls ever leaving that house. As the video plays, Chris Watts begins to physically unravel. He puts his hands on his head. He stares at the screen with a look of pure, concentrated dread. He knows the camera has seen what he thought was hidden in the dark.
What else can I do with this? My detective just showed up. Um, so he'll probably want to talk to you. He'd probably, like I said, he might have you call like the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
Because if there was any sort of action out there,
On his cameras,
I would have got it.
like
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that, and I had parked my truck
I
right
had
here.
to park right here.
Yeah, there's someone.
See if
I can
anything
see where someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver.
As they walk out of Nate's house, Nate whispers to the officer, "He's not acting right. He's never fidgety like that." The first act of this tragedy ends not with a scream, but with a whisper of suspicion. The police leave the scene, but the eyes of the law are now firmly fixed on the man who stayed behind in an empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of a family he claims to be looking for. By the evening of August 13, the suburban silence of Saratoga Trail has been replaced by the low hum of a neighborhood on edge. While the police are processing the house, the investigation shifts focus to the man standing on the periphery. To understand the gravity of what happens next, we have to look at the geometry of the crime scene. Chris Watts claimed that Shannan had taken the children and left, but the physical reality of the street told a different story. Neighbor Nate Tranastic's security camera was positioned with a clear, unobstructed view of the Watts driveway. This camera became the silent witness that dismantled Chris's timeline in real time. When investigators and Chris gathered in Nate's living room to watch the footage from that morning, the room felt heavy with an unspoken realization. On the screen at 5:27 a.m., Chris's white work truck is seen backing up to the garage. A move Nate pointed out was highly unusual for Chris. For the next 50 minutes, the footage shows Chris moving back and forth between the garage and the truck. He is seen loading large items into the cab and the bed. What is more chilling than what the camera captured is what it missed. In a neighborhood where every movement is logged by digital eyes, there is no footage of Shannan Watts walking out the door. There is no footage of the girls, Bella and Celeste, being buckled into car seats. According to the digital record, the family entered the house, but only Chris ever came out. As the footage played, the man standing in Nate's living room began to physically vibrate with nervous energy. He wasn't looking for a glimpse of his wife. He was staring at the evidence of his own movements. He began to ramble, offering explanations for things the officer hadn't even questioned yet. He mentioned his tools, his work schedule, his civil argument with Shannan. White noise intended to drown out the silence of the video. When Chris finally left Nate's house, the neighbor pulled the officer aside. His words were prophetic. "He's acting suspicious. He's usually quiet, but he's talking a mile a minute. Something isn't right." The investigation was no longer just a search for a missing woman. It was now a psychological chess match. By the morning of August 14th, the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had joined the search. They didn't treat Chris like a suspect yet. They treated him like a partner. They let him talk. They let him stand on his front porch and address the media. This media plea is perhaps one of the most studied pieces of footage in modern criminology. Chris stood there, wearing a Colorado t-shirt, crossing his arms and smiling. It wasn't a smile of joy, but what psychologists call duping delight, the unconscious thrill of believing you are successfully fooling your audience. He referred to his daughters in the past tense. He spoke about the house feeling empty, as if it were a permanent state, rather than a temporary emergency. While he was speaking to the cameras, tech experts were already beginning to scrub his digital footprint, and they were looking at the phone he claimed Shannan had left behind. They were looking at his own call logs, and what they were finding was a second life, a shadow version of Chris Watts that didn't match the hero husband persona he was trying so desperately to maintain on that porch. The deeper they looked, the more they realized that the man in the Colorado t-shirt wasn't just hiding a crime, he was hiding an entire identity. As the morning of August 15th broke, the pressure within the Frederick Police Department reached a boiling point. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation had moved from the suburban streets to the sterile, windowless rooms of the police headquarters. They knew that in cases of family annihilation, the first 48 hours are the window of truth. That window was closing. Chris Watts walked into the interrogation room voluntarily. He still believed he was the smartest person in the room. He sat across from Agent Tammy Lee of the CBI and Agent Graham Coder of the FBI. The atmosphere was not one of accusation, but of a false, calculated empathy. They didn't treat him like a monster. They treated him like a man who was under a lot of pressure, a man who might have just snapped. It was a tactical invitation for him to tell the truth. The centerpiece of this encounter was the polygraph test. Before the sensors were even attached, Chris was confident. He laughed, he made small talk. But as the questions began, did you physically cause Shannan's disappearance? Do you know where they are now? The machines began to register the physical toll of a lie. The needles didn't just jump, they screamed. When the test ended, Tammy Lee didn't mince words. She leaned in and told him, Chris, the only person in this room who is not telling the truth is you. You failed. This was the moment the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Chris slumped. He asked to speak to his father, Ronnie Watts. In a devastating display of psychological manipulation, Chris used his own father as a sounding board for a new, even more twisted lie. He told Ronnie that he saw Shannan on the baby monitor strangling their daughters, and that in a blind rage he had killed her to stop her. It was a brilliant, desperate pivot. He was trying to admit to the killing of his wife while maintaining the status of a protective father. But the investigators knew that even this confession was a facade. They let him talk, recording every word, knowing that his admission of killing Shannan was the legal key they needed to unlock the rest of the horror.
She heard him, yeah. And then well, no, that's not her. You're her. Did they leave after that for a long time? So she started hurting kids. Paper. Oh, you guys want that? One. She smelled it. Saratoga. I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, they came back up and they were gone.
While Chris was weaving this tale of a murderous wife in the interrogation room, a team of specialized recovery units was already converging on a desolate patch of land north of Rogue Resources. This was Survey 319, an Anadarko petroleum oil site. Using GPS data from Chris's work truck, they had tracked his exact movements on the morning of the 13th. The site was a landscape of industrial machinery and dirt. It was here that the digital evidence met the physical reality. Drones circling overhead spotted a lone bedsheet, the same pattern found in the Watts trash can, tangled in the brush near two massive oil battery tanks. The recovery process was harrowing. A multi-day operation that tested the resolve of even the most seasoned forensic experts. One by one, the truth was pulled from the darkness. Shannan was found in a shallow grave nearby, but the most haunting discovery lay inside the oil tanks. The investigators had to drain the crude oil, a slow and toxic process, to recover the small broken bodies of Bella and Celeste. The contrast was staggering. The man in the interrogation room was still trying to paint himself as a victim of a family tragedy, while miles away, the physical evidence was revealing a calculated, cold-blooded execution. There was no fit of rage at the oil site. There was only the clinical disposal of a life Chris Watts no longer wanted to lead. As the sun set on August 15th, the timeline of deception had reached its end. The missing persons case was over, and the murder trial was about to begin. But as Chris was led away in handcuffs, the world was left with a question that no forensic kit could answer. How does a man go from hero husband to family annihilator in the span of a single weekend? The legal reality set in faster than the public could process. By August 16th, Chris Watts was no longer the worried husband on the porch. He was an inmate at the Weld County Jail, charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and the unlawful termination of a pregnancy. But even behind bars, the deception continued. He clung to the story that Shannan had harmed the girls, a lie that forced Shannan's family, the Razucheks, to endure a secondary trauma, the character assassination of their daughter while they were still preparing her funeral. However, the weight of the evidence collected in those first 48 hours was insurmountable. The DNA on the oil tank lids, the GPS tracking from his truck, and the digital forensic recovery of his deleted messages created a cage he couldn't escape. On November 6, 2018, in a move that shocked those following the case, Chris Watts entered a guilty plea to all 9 counts against him. By doing so, he avoided the death penalty, a deal Shannan's family supported because, as her mother Sandra stated, he made the choice to take those lives. I do not want to be in the position of making the choice to take his. The sentencing hearing was a rare glimpse into the raw, unfiltered wreckage left behind by a family annihilator. The courtroom was heavy with the presence of the victims. For the first time, the public heard the full impact of the loss. Why Shannan's father, Frank Zuchek, stood just feet away from the man he once called a son and spoke through tears of the monsters that now inhabited his dreams. When the judge Marcelo Kopkow handed down the sentence, 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, plus 84 years for the other crimes, he called it perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime he had ever presided over.
I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shannan Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed with no possibility of parole.
Chris Watts sat motionless, no tears, no visible remorse, just the same blank, detached stare he had maintained since the police first knocked on his door. As the steel doors of the Dodge Correctional Institution closed behind him, the cold trail didn't end. It shifted. The 48-hour timeline was solved, but the psychological landscape remained a minefield. We are left looking at the fragments of a shattered life, a wedding ring on a nightstand, a bedsheet in a field, and a digital footprint that suggested this wasn't a sudden snap, but a slow, calculated erosion of a man's humanity. The story of the Watts family is a cautionary tale for the modern age. It warns us that the person in the frame, the one smiling in the Facebook Live video, might be standing in front of a house built on sand. It reminds us that evil doesn't always arrive with a snarl. Sometimes it arrives with a polite smile, a helpful attitude, and a white work truck backed up to a garage in the pre-dawn light. Shannan, Bella, Celeste, and Nico Watts are gone, but the lessons of their tragedy remain. We look for the signs, we listen for the silence, and we never stop searching for the truth hidden behind the mask. Thank you for joining us for this first chapter on Cold Trail Crimes. The timeline is established, but the investigation is far from over. In our next video, we go beyond the surveillance cameras and into the palm of Chris Watts' hand. We will examine the secret apps, the hidden messages, and the woman who became the catalyst for a catastrophe. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in our next video. Bye for now.